So I'm saying that classical risk methods and practices just can't handle 21st century complexity, 21st century pace of disruption, and global pace of change. And I've introduced the notion of quantum risks. What are quantum risks? First of all, let us consider the nature of organizations today. They are no longer vertically integrated. They no longer do everything in-house. Core functions, core processes are now outsourced, are now partnered with other organizations. So effectively, either they are part of an ecosystem, such as that visually described here, the multiple different colored dots and so forth, reflecting the different relationships between parts of a whole, or they themselves create such a complex ecosystem. The nature of this ecosystem needs to be understood from a systems thinking perspective. Now let us consider a risk. What is a risk? A risk is something which can help us accelerate the achievement of an objective, or it is something which might cause the slowing down of the achievement of an objective. Think of all the interactions here that exist between parts of this ecosystem, all the interconnections, all of the interrelationships. Overall, clearly, you've got a highly complex networked system. Now think of all the multiple cause and effect scenarios that exist in ecosystems today, such as that described visually here on the screen in front of you. Think of the risks which have a root cause in each part of the system that precipitate change as it moves across the system. Think of how those risks have a different shape, and change context as they move across the system. Think of how you can't observe those different shapes of the risk as it traverses the system for a whole lot of different reasons, largely reasons associated with complexity and speed of interaction. Think as well of how behaviors change. What kind of behaviors? Human behaviors, economic behaviors, societal behaviors, and also political behaviors. These things that can help us accelerate the achievement of an objective or slow down the achievement of objective are quantum risks. The risks which exist in different states simultaneously across the system, even though they cannot be observed together. Now that we can understand what a quantum risk is, now let us consider how these quantum risks affect organizations, affect their sustainability, affect their performance in the midst of organizational leaderships having to manage the impact of COVID-19, undertake complex, difficult to execute digital transformations, seek to contribute to saving the planet while seeking to sustain themselves at the same time. Clearly a very, very complex challenge. And for those of us that are deeply expert in the execution of risk methods and practices, can we say credibly, demonstrably credibly, that those classical risk methods and practices can comprehend anything of the sophistication and complexity of the types of risks which exist within these vast ecosystems that today are part and parcel of how organizations are run across every part of the planet. Clearly, decision makers in organizations have a lot to contend with as they seek to get from point A to point B. Getting from point A to point B, the decisions that you make, which effectively is what risk management is about. As you're making decisions, you're managing risks. Decision makers have a lot to contend with. And I would have the view that in the 21st century reality that organizations find themselves in, that the level of risk governance that applies today in most organizations is truthfully akin more to dead reckoning. What is dead reckoning? Dead reckoning is a term that is some hundreds of years old. And it goes back to the time when we didn't have GPS or satellites and so forth, where a ship's captain, being in point A and wanting to get to point B across seas, knew his ship, knew the ship's crew, and understood how to navigate using the sun and the stars. And once he understood the wind, the currents, and how they changed as he moved across, for example, the Atlantic or the Pacific, he could reckon roughly where he was relative to the suns and the stars. And then he would hit landfall. It might be a known landfall, or it might be an unknown landfall. And even where it was a known landfall, it might take him some considerable time, given currents and winds and so forth, to get to a point where he knew exactly where he was on that known landfall, to then navigate to his chosen destination. That was dead reckoning. And I believe that risk governance today in most organizations is akin to dead reckoning. I think dead reckoning is a good metaphor for the level of the efficacy of risk governance in most organizations today, particularly in the context of 10,000 years of technology advancement in this 21st century alone. So before we move into thinking about the uncertainty continuum, there are some fundamental building blocks. It's not a case of waving a magic wand and applying some new technologies with massive algorithmic power and computing power to help us sort out this complexity. There are some fundamental building blocks first required, and they relate to what is required to lead an organization today before you can deploy your AI-powered technologies. And that's the subject matter of the next thought share. Thank you.